It's the Andy Thompson Show on ESPN 97.7.
As you know, Monty, Vaughn's been working on a couple of new pitches, the Eliminator and the Humiliator, to complement his fastball, the Terminator.
I heard that.
Dynamite drop-in, Monty. That broadcast school has really paid off.
It's the Andy Thompson Show.
Thanks for being with us. It's the Andy Thompson Show with Rustyn Burnside, Max Christensen in the house with Big Game James. This segment brought to you by Indy RV Sales. Check out IndyRVSales.com. Get a $99 pre-trip inspection at Indy RV Sales. IndyRVSales.com. The Cox brothers will help make finding your dream RV a breeze. IndyRVSales.com. We welcome in Rustyn Burnside. We're looking to talk a little BYU football. Burnsy, how you feeling, buddy?
Feeling good, man. Feeling good. And I'm missing you guys in studio right now, but absolutely honored. I have the pleasure of joining you via the airwaves today. And I'll tell you what, the reason I'm feeling so good, fellas, is because in my hands, I hold a copy of Lindy Sports College Football National 2024 Preview. Now, have any of you fine folks ever shelled out the $11.99 in U.S. currency to pick up this book?
Wow, I haven't spent that much. It's been a while since I've done Lindy's, but I love it. I love Athlon. I love Phil Steele's, but I love any college football magazine, and I'm very pleased that you invested in it with your own money to help out the program, Rustyn. We'll get you reimbursed with some poo-poo chicken.
All right. Well, I appreciate that a lot. That means a lot to me because you came through again and again and again. So let's talk about BYU. And when I say let's talk about the Cougs in particular, let's talk about what Lindy's has to say about BYU. Mm-hmm. And then if you guys agree, disagree, if that's on point, because the thing is, when you're fitting 134 FBS teams into this magazine, into this book, I mean, some guys only get one page, right? Most guys only get one page. Your Ohio States will get their 2 pages. Your Georgias will get their 2 pages. Your Bamas. I mean, every once in a while, too, you'll just see these teams have 2 pages. But BYU got 1. Utah State has 1. Utah is a 2-pager, if I remember right. I'd have to double-check, but we're going to get to the Utes later on in the week, possibly next week. BYU's a 1-pager, okay? They are ranked right now 13th in the Big 12, okay? Yeah. 62nd overall out of 134 FBS teams. Obviously, last year 5-7, 2-7 in the Big 12, tied for 11th. And then here's what they have to say. Here's the overview. Let's start with that before we go to the offense, before we go to the defense. This is Lindy's overview on the Cougars, and I quote, "After decades of waiting for the opportunity to compete in a power conference, the Cougars ended the season on a 5-game losing streak, dampening the enthusiasm. Things could get even tougher as the BYU schedule brings explosive offenses from SMU, Arizona, UCF, and Utah. Considering that the Cougars missed a bowl for just the second time in 19 seasons, another bowlless campaign won't do." Now, he says it won't do, but will it have to do?
I mean, explosive offenses, they included Utah in that list. I don't know how good SMU is.
Well, so SMU actually does put up points.
They play SMU. They play Wyoming. Who's their out-of-conference games again?
They're out of conference. They start the year at home in Provo, at Lavelle Edwards with Southern Illinois. They're on the road in Dallas taking on SMU. They travel to Laradice to take on the Cowboys in Wyoming. And that's their out of conference. Everything else obviously is going to be Big 12 related. So Southern Illinois, SMU, Wyoming. And I mean, out of those 3 games, you'd like to chalk up Southern Illinois as a dub, but on the road, SMU and Wyoming are both big fat question marks, right?
Yeah, just because who knows how good. See, I'm more of a Bohannon believer than I think even a lot of BYU fans who are wearing Cougar blue, royal blue shaded goggles. I think if you look at Bohannon, when he was the guy at Baylor a couple years ago, he won them 8 games or something like that. They had a pretty good season in the Big 12, like the Big 12 with Texas and Oklahoma. I think he beat Texas. I don't know if he beat Oklahoma, but he beat some of the biggest teams in the Big 12. He goes to USF and has a horrible year, but I blame that not necessarily just on him. You're playing at USF. That's a crappy program. Now you're back in the Big 12. So I trust Bohannon maybe a little bit more, and the recency of him having a bad year last year doesn't taint what he was able to do. And by the way, Dave Aranda would have loved to go back in time and probably give the job to Gary Bohannon, instead of Blake Shapen, who's been kind of a dud over the last couple of years. So I believe in Bohannon. SMU's always whatever, SMU. You're not going to lose to them, I don't think. Going to Laradice, as you put it, is more concerning to me than SMU. Max, what are your thoughts, buddy?
I think it's all concerning. I mean, you look at game 1 last year, okay? I sat on this program 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 times, and I said, listen, they opened with Sam Houston, okay? That could be a loss.
Yeah.
And everybody laughed at me. The score is 14-0.
It was a tough game.
Okay,
yeah,
I was like, I lined up against Sam Houston State in the WAC. They're legit. Watch out when they're coming to the Velvet Stadium game 1. Mm-hmm. Okay. Southern Illinois, they've made a lot. They're a good FCS program. They've made a lot of noise in the FCS playoffs in years past. What's to say that BYU's offense has gotten any better? And what's to say they're not overlooking them trying to get to Dallas? Yeah, trying to get to I think. The game in Laramie is going to be the least concerning game because there's so much familiarity there. Yeah. Old Mountain West Conference foes.
Is that a night game? We'll have to look at it, but I'm sure it is.
I believe it is. I think there are 2 separate. No, I think I don't know. I'd have to double check that, but it's a midday game.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of familiarity with playing in Laramie, with doing that kind of stuff, and so I think the more concerning games are going to be Southern Illinois and SMU.
Oh wow, so the complete opposite.
Yeah, I mean, because I think especially I watched for some reason. Tuned into a couple SMU games because they would play on Fridays, and so we'd fly to wherever I was playing. We'd watch an SMU game and then go to sleep for our game on Saturday. SMU's offense last year was pretty legit. I don't know who all the guys who transferred, and maybe they didn't lose that many because they're going to the ACC, they're in a Power 5 conference, whatever. But yeah, I think SMU's legit. I think Southern Illinois could give them a run, and who knows how Wyoming's going to look. And also too, that is a rivalry game geographically, and so that could be another tough one for BYU on the road. So we're not talking a guaranteed 3-0 as Rustyn said. You'd like to say that, but for BYU going to the Big 12, in the Big 12, we're not saying they're going to go 3-0 to start the season.
Yes, I remember saying when they went to the Big 12, like, you don't treat Sam Houston like that's a team you should be concerned about because you're not independent BYU anymore who gets run up by Liberty or whoever. Yeah. Like, you have to graduate your mindset to, I'm a Big 12 now. This is a money game, but then they played Sam Houston, like you said. That was not a good game.
Ugly.
And they win by 2 possessions. So there is a possibility that this year is worse for BYU. I just find myself always being more optimistic when it comes to the Cougars for some reason. What were you going to say, Rustyn?
I was going to say, Lindy's is a little more on that optimistic track, too. And by the way, BYU, Wyoming, that is a 7 o'clock start. That is a night game that you folks were discussing. And SMU, they put 32nd overall. So they have a lot of faith in the Ponies this year in this here magazine. They put Wyoming at 93rd. And of course, Southern Illinois is not going to have a ranking out of the FBS teams, but that preseason slate is going to tell you a lot of what you can expect from BYU this season and how things are going to go. It goes on to talk about Bohannon in a lot of, let's just say confident terms, right? It says in 2021, he led the Bears to a Big 12 championship, a victory over Ole Miss in the Sugar Bowl, but he hasn't played since the 2022 season due to that shoulder injury. So with these guys competing, Bohannon and Jake Retzlaff, of course, in that spring, the battle's going to continue into fall camp, according to them. They talked about Retzlaff struggling with turnovers in his 4 starts last year, but he didn't throw an interception in his 15 spring practices, AT, which is something that I know you're very, very big on. And so this quarterback battle will be something to keep an eye on. Now, they did list Retzlaff as the projected starter here in this, which very well may be the case. But it says the biggest part of blame for the abysmal production in 23 was placed on the offensive line, right? And that's something that hits home for us personally, because all we did in the offseason was tout BYU's offensive line, and regardless of who's at quarterback, at least we know they can pound the rock and they can get pass protection, and then all of that disappeared in flames. That was gone. It was up in smoke, man. There was nothing there with that offensive line.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be Bohannon. I still think it will be. I know they didn't come out of camp saying anything. Retzlaff, obviously a little bit more familiar with the system going into his second year. But if it's Retzlaff, that's not a good sign, right? Especially, game one. Especially, like, even if you think it's even, you've got to be like, we got to go with this transfer, Bohannon, who's won in the Big 12 before. Not this Retzlaff kid, right?
Kind of because you know you're getting with him. Yeah. He's definitely more of a backup. Like, hey, come in and get you
chicken with his head cut off, running around trying to make a play. Can make a play
every once in a while off the bench. But I mean, it's like give this guy. I think give Bohannon a shot while everybody's healthy, right? And then if the team absolutely crumbles, then you hand over to Retzlaff, and that's the other thing too. You know, who says that BYU's offense got any better, especially on the offensive line? I mean, because the third round pick they had Kingsley Suamatia get taken by the Chiefs, right? As an underclass, so they lost their best offensive lineman. Like what was supposed to be the strength of their team, they lost their best guy.
And it's supposed to be the strength of their team the last few years. Yes. And it's been a huge disappointment.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the deal is with that, because you have the dudes, you have the bodies. You bring up Kingsley, but think about all the other guys who have come in the last couple of years, Blake Freeland and stuff, and you couldn't run the ball. And you got good run. That's what's amazing about this era of BYU football. You got dudes at running back. Yeah. This LJ Martin guy is like a legitimate player, and he had like 1 or 2 good games last year. So my disappointment with BYU is, like, I've always thought in the Big 12, you're not going to be able to air raid with these Big 12 teams on the edges. No. You've got to be Stanford and run the ball. And they've been really disappointing that way. So hopefully that gets better for them this year, Burns.
You talk about LJ Martin, AT, and that's a big point. It's both an optimistic thing and a pessimistic thing when you realize that Martin, in his freshman season, led the team with a team-high 518 rushing yards. Like, that's awesome. Yeah. You have that production from a young player. It's not great. It shows you how bad the run game actually was for this team. 104.3 yards per game, which was 118th in the FBS. The whole offense as a whole was 118th. Even when you factor passing into that, they were sitting dang near towards the bottom, and their defense finished 106th overall. And they talk about LJ Martin. They talk about how the receiver corps should be kind of stocked up with Lassiter and Roberts and Epps and all these guys who return, and Keanu Hill moving over to tight end. They say that should be one of their strong points, which is fantastic. But the defense, that was also a major concern. We talked about the 118th overall offense. What about the 106th overall defense behind Jay Hill, right? And this Jay Hill, I just remember flashback going back to a year ago, how excited and how pumped up BYU fans were, and still should be, about the addition of Jay Hill. It's a transition period, a learning period, but I think it's fair to say the defense probably fell a little below expectations.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when Jay Hill came in, you could see the philosophy difference when they were on defense, which I liked, but they just didn't have the personnel.
Thank you.
Even though they brought in, I was fine that they brought in basically FCS and Group of 5 All-Stars, like a bunch of kids from Boise State, the Weber State kids, like, that was fine. You've got to kind of gap fill when you're making the transition from independent to the Big 12. Get just the best players who are ready to go right now, but they didn't have the personnel, and I don't blame Jay Hill. I think I liked how they were coming at the quarterback a little bit more, even though the numbers weren't there. They weren't getting to the quarterback and bringing him down very much, but I think Jay Hill's
11 sacks.
Yeah, I think Jay Hill's the right guy and is a great coach. They just need dudes on defense. I'll tell you what they need. They need Marcus McKenzie at cornerback to come in and shut some people down. He's second on the depth chart, I think, right now. Of course, Pineview's own. He was so awesome. Remember him on special teams last year, like making a bunch of tackles and stuff. I hope he gets some time in the secondary this year for BYU. But they got Batty back, who they're really excited about. Probably the best player on that defensive roster. John Nelson, Isaiah Banya, the transfer from Boise last year. So it seems like they've got at least names on the defensive line that have kind of underachieved at this point. They need to put pressure on people, these pass-happy teams in the Big 12 that just wasn't, they weren't able to do that last year, which is disappointing.
Well, and also Ben Bywater, right? That's a recognizable name.
Yeah.
Back patrolling things. So the defense, there's nowhere but up to go right now for the Cougs, and I'm excited to see kind of how that transitions. And I know that Lindy's wants to talk to us about the high-flying offenses like SMU, Arizona, UCF, and Utah. But, I mean, I don't think they're going to be giving up 417 yards per game again necessarily on a week-to-week basis. I think they're going to get more than 11 sacks, which Lindy says is the worst in the nation. So, I mean, it's time, man. It's time. Like, you can only go up from here right now if you're the Cougars, if you're a Cougar fan.
Yeah. It's hard for me, Rustyn, because my whole life I've just, had this little brother complex when it comes to BYU football. And I always think they're going to come back and win this game, or they're better than they are. But this is a bad team, and it was a bad team last year. I hope they do better this year, but it's not, I've got to get over this thing where I always think BYU is going to be better than they are. I think their over-under in Vegas was 4.5.
Yeah. And
I don't know if I think I said on the air a few weeks ago, I see 5. Let's go through that. I see 5 wins. But now Max is convincing me they're going to lose to SMU, and, SIU is going to be a problem. So now I'm panicking on my Skeeter beater for the win total for BYU. Do you see 5 wins this year?
I don't. I mean, I was going to ask you guys, do you guys see them going bowling at 6? Because I sure don't. I don't know if I see them getting to 5. Because here's the deal. We could realistically walk into the Big 12 with them being 1-2. I could see them losing in Dallas. I could see them losing in Laramie.
Yeah.
I mean, especially, and again, if they don't absolutely blow the doors off of Southern Illinois, that should be a problem for everyone. The score should be 67-4. So if that doesn't happen game 1, then I think they struggle against SMU and in Laramie.
It's just hard to look at I don't want to be super negative here about the Cougars, Birdsey. I want them to have a good year, but it's just hard to look at their weapons and you compare them to Oklahoma State. Or remember last year they go into Dallas-Fort Worth and play TCU, and it looked like they were playing an NFL team. TCU had that 6'8" tight end who was just manhandling and just catching balls down the seam. And then you look at whether it's Retzlaff or Bohan is going to be throwing to. Chase Roberts, that's a bona fide guy, even though he hasn't had super-duper production. He's been injured. Cody Epps is a fine little receiver, but he's not starting for Oklahoma State. He's not starting for Kansas. Darius Laster is the transfer from some directional Michigan school who they need to have a big year. And then we're through the Isaac Rex era at tight end. So Keanu Hill is transitioning to be their primary tight end this season. So, I think LJ Martin is probably, for me, their most exciting skill player on offense. And he's a guy, like you said, Rustyn, had 500 yards last year, but as a true freshman. So, I mean, he had a good year last year. But
when you look at the schedule, you talk about going bowling and what it's going to take for this team. Let's say optimistically, that BYU's 2-1 by the time they hit K-State in towards the tail end of September once the Big 12 play starts. They're 2-1. They take your pick of Southern Illinois, SMU, Wyoming.
I think they're going to be 3-0, but that's because I'm an idiot.
Okay, even if they're 3-0, all right. Baylor on the road on the 28th, okay? And then at the end of the season, BYU's bowl eligibility, I firmly believe, will not be decided until the tail end of the season. You have Baylor on the 28th, and then you skip all the way to on the road in Tempe against the Sun Devils. That's on the 23rd of November. And then you're home against Houston. Those are two teams right now, ASU and Houston, that you're often paired with in the Football Power Index and these prep magazines, right? So those last 2 weeks will be massive. You're going to be hovering around 3-4 wins. Maybe you get a surprise. Maybe you take a Baylor. Maybe you take a UCF. I don't know. That's why they play the game. It's not all done on paper. But those last 2 games, on the road at ASU, home against Houston, in my mind, will 100% determine, unless BYU just absolutely falls apart, if the Cougars are going bowling. Because like it said, I mean, this is a team that's missed a bowl game for only the second time in 19 seasons. Even if the year is disappointing, BYU typically has 6. But I think this year's going to be decided at the tail end.
Holy cow. All right, let's talk about BYU basketball, man. This is rough. Like BYU fans, at least you're a basketball school now. Don't get depressed if we're being negative about football season. You got Igor coming to save the program. All right, we got to go. We got to end the show. Rustyn, great job. We got to play some commercials for you. We'll be back tomorrow 4 to 6 right here on the Andy Thompson Show with Rustyn Burnside, Max Christensen, and Big Game James. We'll see you tomorrow.